From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Library of Congress today. My name is a very amplified Rob Casper. Can you hear me? Is it good in the back? Okay. I'm Rob Casper. I'm head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the Library of Congress, and I want to welcome you to our National Poetry Month Conversations with African Poets and Writers program, featuring Caine Prize winner Lidudumalingani. We're thrilled to have him here. We're thrilled to have you here. We're thrilled to celebrate the Caine Prize. I want to give a special thanks to Lizzie Attray, the director of the Caine Prize, for helping make this possible. I could not be more delighted with this series and with the partners that we work with. And I'm going to introduce one of them right now, but before I do so, let me just ask you to turn off your cell phones and electronic devices, anything you might have that would interfere with this event. Second, there'll be a Q&A session afterwards. Please note that this program is being recorded, and by participating in the Q&A session, you give us permission for future use of the recording. This series started really out of a partnership with the African and Middle Eastern Division and its chief, Mary Jane Deeb. And she's been an inspiration to all of us that have gotten a chance to work with her. And I'm delighted that we have continued it and deepened our partnership. And she'll talk a little bit more about new partnerships going forward. But it's a tremendous series. I'm very proud to have done it. And I'm very thankful to Mary Jane Deeb for helping make it possible. So please welcome Mary Jane Deeb.
Okay, well, welcome to the African Middle East Division. I mean, it's very exciting today to start 2017 with our conversations with African poets and writers. And as Rob Casper said, this is a series that has become iconic, if I may say so. It is known now across the globe. People are very much aware of the great speakers that we have brought to the library. Let me say a few words. The Poetry and Literature Center has been a fantastic partner with us, and so have been two other institutions. The Africa Society of the Summit, of the National Summit on Africa, has been there from day one. And day one goes back to a major event that we did with the great poet Achebe, writer and poet Achebe. And we did this program almost a decade ago, and we had started it also with another partner who's coming back on board, and that is Howard University. Howard University had organized a major symposium on Achebe. And we always thought Howard University should be a partner. And lo and behold, today I want to announce that Professor Ambe Cham, representing Howard University, has agreed to be a partner. So now we have Library of Congress, two divisions, Poetry and Literature Center and African Middle East Division, and the Africa Society and Howard University are co-sponsoring our series on conversations with African poets and writers. And the Poetry Center has been a fantastic partner and has brought in a number of award-winning writers. The African section, all four of the specialists in the Africa section have been fantastic representatives of this division in bringing and informing us about the writers and poets who are writing not only the established ones, but the new ones like the one today. And now to introduce the Caine Prize winner, Lidudumalingani, we have the president of the Africa Society who will be doing the introduction. So here we have Patricia Bain.
Good morning, or good afternoon. So we're here, welcome. This afternoon, I'm proud to introduce Lidudumalingani, who won the 2016 Kane Prize for African Writing, described as Africa's leading literary award, for his short story entitled Memories We Lost, that was published in The Incredible Journeys, Stories That Move You. Memories We Lost, it tells the emotionally charged story of a girl who acts as a protector of her sister, whose serious mental health problems caused consternation in South African village. Her situation deteriorates as her care is entrusted to Nkuzi, a local man who employs traditional techniques to get rid of people's demons. Lidudumalingani is a writer, he's a filmmaker and a photographer. And I remember reading someplace that he says that he writes visually. I guess he will explain to us what that means. He thinks visually. I think the photography overtakes all other aspects. This is a very short synopsis of the writer's bio, which by no means is a reflection of the accomplishments and the amazing things that he has done. He was born in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. He has published short stories, nonfiction, and criticisms in various publications. His films have been screened at a number of films and festivals. This is the part I like. He's called the cool kid of South African literature currently. So we welcome him to the Conversations with African Poets and Writers. I'm now going to ask Laverne Page, no, to start the conversation. All right, not. I will ask Mr. Lidudumalingani himself. Please clap for him. Thank you.
Greetings. Firstly, thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you for all the partners for bringing me here. I've been in DC since Monday night. It's been interesting. I'm going to read from page 76, and then I think I'm supposed to read for like plus minus 10 minutes. I'll just stop maybe when I'm tired, and then, yeah. We sat there and watched the day go by. We didn't even attempt to say a word. I realized then that she and I needed no words. In the afternoon that day, it began to rain. I dragged her out of the house. We jumped in the rain, begging it to pour on us so we could be tall, big, strong, and bold. In that moment, my sister returned. She smiled and laughed. That day we began to form new childhood memories, filling the void left by the one that had been wiped out. We lay on the ground, stretched our arms and legs, rain falling on our faces, and felt free. But my mother had seen us laugh and jump and thought that this thing was going to come again. The following day, the entire village gathered outside our house for yet another ritual meant to cure my sister. She had been through all these rituals and church sermons and nothing had changed. Each time, sangomas and pastors promised that she would be healed within days. There was once, at least according to the elders, a glimpse of the sangoma's healing. The tobacco, meat and matches that had been put in the rontavel for the ancestors to take at night in one of the many rituals were not there by morning, leading them to believe that the ancestors had healed her. It was not long after that that this thing again, proving that the tobacco, meat and matches had simply been stolen by thieves, that it returned. The day of the ritual, I remember how the clouds moved across the sky in a hurry, and how thick fog hung onto the grass, the mountains, the riverbanks and forest as if to announce death. It hung so low that people appeared to be floating with their legs cut off below their knees. The women's chatter and songs reached us long before the crowd was visible. It appeared as if the fog had swallowed them and that the women would never come into sight. All the same, they did. They ululated and chanted song as they approached our home. Men came in silence, arms folded behind their backs, carrying sticks. A few minutes after the women arrived, smoke escaped the fireplace into the sky, dancing with the moving clouds as if the sky was their dance floor. The children ran around and kicked soccer balls that had been made by stuffing papers into plastic bags. Everyone moved in a chaotic choreography. That way went an obese woman carrying a bucket of water on her head. This way went a child with a tablecloth. That way went a dog with a bone. This way went chickens. That way stood women gossiping about my sister. From our house, I could see the chorus amplifying as more people arrived. I looked at my sister and found her face, as it had been in earlier months, emotionless. In the past few days, she had given me hope that she had returned. Now, tears rolled down our cheeks. I knew then that she still felt something, that the last few days of holding hands, laughing and jumping in the rain were not a dream. The fog began to clear, and everything came into focus. The mountains, landscape, river, and the other villages were there, unmoved. An old man who had been smoking his pipe behind the kraal emptied it and stuffed it in his pockets. The ritual began. Knives were drawn and the goat was first stabbed in the stomach to summon our ancestors from their enclaves, and then it was meat. After some time, an old aunt came for us, calling for us to come out of the house. We hugged tightly, my sister and I, wiped each other's tears. It was only after we had heard her footsteps approaching our house that we walked out, holding hands, fingers tightly intertwined. The only way to have torn me away from her would have to cut us apart. The villagers shouted insult at the thing as it remained unknown to them. For what felt like an entire lifetime, while my sister and I sat at a corner in the kraal, our heads bowed, the elders kept referring to this thing as demons and the devil's work. None of them knew my sister. None of them cared. The sun was up now, thick shadows gathering around the house. Even though there was no wind, the windmill by the fields made a creaking sound. My mother was torn and defeated and questioned why God gave this thing to my sister and my father. Secrets stay buried for so long, but one day they rise to open like seeds breaking free from the earth. Nobody had ever mentioned that my father had this thing, that he had left one day on his horse to see distant relatives and had never come back, to only be seen in the way the deceased are seen after their death in dreams and hallucinations. He had been seen in some village at least twice, my mother told me. The person who had seen him yelled and waved, but he never bothered to look. They were not sure if it was my father, but they were convinced that it had to be. He was never buried, though it is now 20 years later. There was nothing to bury. I have no memory of my father. There was always hope that he would return from somewhere. Nobody knew where, nobody cared, as long as he returned. The night of the ritual, my sister and I slept lying the same way instead of in different directions. I woke up and she was holding me, squeezing me, and she had sunk her teeth into the pillow so she would not cry. She jacked for a few minutes and then fell asleep in my arms. In the morning, I went to milk the goat. I saw two human shadows hovering above the kraal. At first, though it was unusual, I thought nothing of it, even as they mumbled something to each other. In the shadows that leapt inside the kraal with the smell of manure, I saw that it was my mother and an uncle who had come to stay with us for the ritual. It was as if their heads were bound together into one, creating a giant head, a ghost even. I had meant to get up, but when I heard them mention my sister, I put the jug of milk down and crouched, leaning on the goat so it did not move. My father and Smellyfoot, the man who had moved in with my mother, were making plans to take my sister away. The medication and the ritual did not work, my mother said. The way she saw it, my sister needed to see Nkunzi. This thing is going to come back, she said.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Is your mic on?
1, 2, 1, 2, yeah, it is.
Okay, it is. So now you're going to hear from the cool kid?
I'm not sure where that comes from.
And
It's definitely not true.
well, I was going to say, now you're going to hear from the cool kid and the grandmoms. Put labels. Thank you so much for reading that passage from Memories We Lost, which focuses on mental illness. At the end of the story ends, but at the end of the story, where do these children go? That was my question. Children wandering around, the one who is attempting to help, and then the one that's ill. Where do they go? Especially when you say 20 years later, you know, in your story. So there's something there.
I mean, the ending was really motivated by two factors. One of them was the deadline, and the other was also this idea that a story is never really finished. So what I really wanted to do was because it's also a short story, and I'm usually not really a short story writer, so I struggled with the story. So the idea was to then write an ending that suggested that there was a lot more going on. And by that, I didn't really suggest that it would come from me necessarily. I was hoping that people would read the story and they would perhaps take the challenge to finish it.
Okay, I should point out that I'm asking this because although I would normally be interested, also there's an investigation right now currently in South Africa into the treatment of mentally ill patients. They were removed, a large number of them were removed from their hospitals, and they were just sent elsewhere, and many of them, or most of them, died. And so it's a political and a social issue, and it's a tragedy. And so since you're writing about mental illness, I'm wondering if this is more material for you, for the stories that you write.
I mean, because I wrote the story and I've spent about possibly close to a year talking about mental illness in South Africa and talking about the story specifically. I mean, when the news of that tragedy broke out, it was heartbreaking. And then there was like there's a thing they do in Parliament in South Africa where the president addresses the nation. And one of the people from the political parties, the opposition, asked if they could give a moment of silence to, I think at the time it was around 125 people that had died. And the Madam Speaker of Parliament refused. And she was like, we are not here to mourn 125 dead people. So it was heartbreaking for me because at that moment, I really got to kind of understand what it means to have a family member who's got mental illness, and what it means when they die, that the government doesn't care. So because of how emotional that was for me, I've never really seen it as a, I mean, to put it in a very crass way, as an opportunity for material. It's just been really heartbreaking that I haven't even thought about, do I write more about it, or do I make images, or do I make films? I haven't really thought about it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about the Caine Prize. I'm curious as to whether or not it's made a great difference to you. I'm wondering if it's contributed to your current projects and the audiences that you reach. When exactly were you notified that you had won the prize?
It really happens on the night. You don't really know until the announcement is made. But I mean, for me, the exciting thing was finding out that I had been shortlisted, because Memories Lost was a second story of fiction that I've ever written, and it was more than anything, it was the idea for me that I needed to write other things except nonfiction. And so I'll write a short story, and that's what I did. So to have it nominated, shortlisted for the Kane Prize was amazing for me. I was really excited. And I mean, if you get shortlisted, you go to London and you spend about a week doing readings and talking to people. And it's very exciting until the night of the announcement, and then you start to think about, who's going to win the Caine Prize. And it was exciting to win, and I've really had like an exciting year. And because I've never really written any fiction before this, so it was exciting for me to be immediately thrown into a very wide reading community, which I've really appreciated, which I think for any writer, that's what's important, that your writing is read widely, and that's what's happened to my own writing, and I'm very grateful for that.
For the Caine Prize, you don't submit your own work, someone else submits the work,
Yeah,
correct?
so the publisher submits the work to the Kane Prize.
Mhm.
Yeah. But you can ask your publisher to submit. You can make a suggestion.
Okay. Okay, well, can you tell us more about your current projects? Since you're a writer, a filmmaker, and photographer, I'm just wondering what you have been working on, and which of these genres do you enjoy most, and in which are you the most prolific, and if there's a certain subject that you prefer. So there are a number of questions in one.
The other amazing thing that happened to me in 2016 was that I was given the Miles Moreland Scholarship, which allows me to spend a year writing my debut novel. So that's what I'm going to be doing next month. So I'm trying to really not do anything else. The one thing that I'm trying to do, I've been working on a film script for the past 4 years, and it's been really up and down, a lot of suggestions from people that I send it to. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is to finish that film script off before I begin work on the novel.
Mm-hmm. What's the subject?
Of the novel?
Of the film and also of the novel.
I can talk about the film, but not really the novel. It's not even a novel at this point, it's just really. When I was in film school, I went to film school with a photographer from South Africa called Zanele Moholi, whom I think most of you might, familiar with her work. And if any of you have met her, you would understand the power that she has, right? So a lot of the conversations that were going on around my class when I was in film school were about, because a lot of violence in South Africa happens to lesbians. There's a very terrible thing called corrective rape. So that's what the film is about. But more than that, the film is really looking at a society that allows, or a society where corrective rape happens. So that's what the film is about. And this is why it's been really difficult to write, because for me I mean, it's not just the subject, but it's important for everything about it to kind of like fit perfectly into both my own politics, but also into, for the film to go against the sort of like very problematic descriptions and the problematic conversations that go on around corrective rape.
What does that mean, corrective rape?
So, I mean, so the way to describe it is that there's the idea that if a bunch of men decide to rape a lesbian, gang rape a lesbian, it's called corrective rape because the idea is that you cannot be a lesbian, so we will show you that, you are a woman. And this is why it's called corrective rape, because in their minds it's the idea that you will then become a woman, as as they describe and see it.
Okay, and you cannot tell us about the novel, so I won't ask any more questions about the novel. What about short stories, since you're doing so well with that genre?
I don't know about doing well. I mean, I wrote one short story.
But you won the Caine Prize.
There's one short story that I'm working on. Again, I mean, my short stories are always sort of like my writing and my film work and my photography is always really, in a way, just me being very receptive of the community that I live in. So the short story that I'm currently working on, which I hope to finish before the novel, is about shack fires in South Africa. So in South Africa, there's places called informal settlement where people live in shacks. So these are houses made of zinc. And often what happens is that because some of them don't have electricity, so people use candles, and what happens often is that there's usually fires and people die. I mean, I remember one in 2011 which happened right on New Year's Eve when people were going out to celebrate 2011. People were dying in their houses. And about a month ago, there was another in Cape Town again, which happened in an interesting place where it's called, the place is called Imiza Moyetu, and it's in Hout Bay. And it sits right next to the very big mansions of rich white people in Cape Town. So I was really interested in sort of like that relationship between people who live in these very lavish houses and people who live in shacks and who live in poverty, and there's houses that they really try to build and get things together without any money, and then it get destroyed overnight. So the short story I'm writing is about one family who loses a daughter in that fire.
Oh.
It's a very happy story.
Yes, I'm just thinking about the social issues that concern you, and it seems wide-ranging. And wow, this with the films, I'm curious. I know that there's a prolific film industry in South Africa. So lots is happening with literature, with filmmaking. Is there a difference, since you live in Cape Town, is there a difference between Cape Town and Johannesburg in terms of, let's say, literary activities?
Zachary is here, he can maybe help me out. Look, Cape Town is interesting in a way because, there's a lot going on, especially with young black creatives, and they, we try to get together and do things. But the larger community is in Johannesburg. And I've toyed with the idea of going to Johannesburg a lot, but, it hasn't happened. So, there's certainly differences, and I think Johannesburg is far more receptive of young black creatives, both in filmmaking and literature, and Cape Town is less so. Cape Town is still, predominantly very white orientated, both when it comes to spaces to exhibit your work, whether it's films or you want to read literature. So you have to really, find the sort of like the spaces that have been curated for people like you to go read your work. And often, you find that that's perhaps the best way to read your work to people that are actually, I suppose, to put it very bluntly, won't be asking you very obvious questions about what you're trying to do. People who understand what you're trying to do.
Okay. And can you tell us something about where you read your work? A little bit more, those of us who may not know that side of city life.
I generally am just at home the whole time. I hear about people reading their work, and I plan to go, and then things happen, and then I don't go. I just stay at home and read. But there's certainly so there's a place called Observatory, so people can get around there. There's different places there to read your work. But there's also young people. There's a thing called creative nestling, which gets people together to read their work, both in Johannesburg and Cape Town. Creative nestling.
Nestling.
Yeah. So so that happens as well in Cape Town. But also I have a circle of friends that I can send my work to. So I'm in touch with these people on emails, and if I finish a short story, I send it, and if they finish anything, they send it around, and we can all read each other's work, which I think is hugely important in Cape Town to do.
Okay. Well, there's a quote attributed to you in one of your interviews. I think South African people should read more South African and African fiction before reading anything else. There seems to be a growing list of new Black writers being published at the moment, and this is encouraging. I am wondering who you like among these new writers. Can you say something about that?
That quote was, sort of specifically talking about a lot of the times in South Africa you meet people and they will tell you, oh no, there's not good literature coming from South Africa, and this is why I'm reading this or reading that. And I think that's completely rubbish, because I think if you really are interested in reading South African literature, you will find it, and you'll find some really good literature. So part of the young writers that I really love reading is Bongani Kona, who was shortlisted for the Kane Prize with me. Masande, whose novel The Reactive is absolutely amazing. Songezwe Mabantla, who Penumbra? Yeah, he wrote Penumbra, which is an insane novel. So there's a lot of people like that who are writing those novels, and I'm hugely excited to write at this particular time, because I feel like there's a certain presence of young Black writers, and I'm excited to be in that sort of like space as well.
Okay. And since we're here in the U.S., who are your favorite American writers?
I don't read any American literature.
Okay. Let's go to the last question.
It's impossible to escape U.S. literature. It's like you can try, but it's. But so I have an interesting, or I suppose I grew up in the villages, and a lot of the things that I read in the villages were very English. So Shakespeare was one of the things we read. So when I started reading, I was already aware that I needed to read Black authors. So a lot of the authors that I love from America would be the Black authors of America. So the Toni Morrisons, Maya Angelou. So those are the people, and James Baldwin, of course. So those are the people that I really love reading in America, and also sort of like the newer African-American writers. I just call them African writers. So Teju Cole, Chimamanda. So those are the people that I really love reading, and.
Okay, my last question then might be a little bit redundant, but it's one that we always ask. What do you think is the future for African writers, both diasporic and from the continent? And what steps need to be taken to bring more recognition from the international community? So, prize wins, such as the Caine Prize, of course, but what steps need to be taken to bring more recognition from the international community?
It's a very tricky question to answer, because I think I think often there's a disparity between the presence of African literature, sort of like what is being published and what people are reading. I don't necessarily think that we as African writers or African publishers have to do anything different. I mean, people are publishing books, people are publishing online. So for me, the thing is, if you are really interested in reading any African writer, you will find them, and there is a lot going on. And if you are really interested, you will find them because they exist everywhere.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we should open the floor for questions.
Thank you. I really enjoyed hearing part of your story, and I'll finish reading it. My question to you is, you talk about in South Africa how it's considered to be possession that causes mental illness. In a lot of other African cultures, it seems to be continent-wide that there's a denial of mental illness and therefore a reluctance to treat it as such. Do you feel that writing about it is going to, you as an African writer writing about mental illness existing within the African community, will make it a little bit more accepted and also lead people to look at it as an illness rather than a spiritual possession or even worse, non-existent at all?
I mean, that's I suppose a very difficult question to answer for me, because I mean, I wrote the story because I was really concerned about the conversations that people were having around mental illness, more so in my own community in the villages, and you know, so the idea was to really bring that conversation right into sort of like people's everyday life, and my idea was that if I write this story, people are going to read it, and perhaps we are going to have this conversation. And I think that's where it begins. It begins with openly having the conversation. And then we can begin to kind of like change how the society sees it. Because the problem is that no one talks about it. I mean, the story of the government, for example, that decision was made purely on, you know, on the idea that what are you going to do with mentally ill people? You can do whatever. Because these people were taken from a hospital and they were given to NGOs that have no experience at all. And I mean, the horrific stories is that they were even picked up they were just thrown into vans and just driven out to the villages. So part of my idea with the story was to do the opposite of that, was to get people to talk about it. And hopefully, once that conversation begins, we can then begin to come up with a number of solutions.
Thank you very much. Your story is very inspiring, and you made me think of different things. But so what are other subjects that are not talked about, that should be talked about in literature, that you feel as a writer that should be addressed and are not being addressed? And I don't mean necessarily only in South Africa. It could be in the United States, it could be any other part of the world that you feel should be addressed.
Oh, geez. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I work on I suppose, story-to-story basis. And you know, when I was writing about mental illness, it was something that I was really thinking about. And when I wrote the short film, and I mean the film, and I'm continuing to write it because that's something I was really concerned about. So I'm not quite sure what else I could write about in the future, but I certainly know that being one of the interesting things for me, being a village child, is that when you come to the city, there's a lot of cultural issues, a lot of cultural difference that you have to, you know, sort of like reconcile your own belief and the kind of like the way the city operates. So a lot of my writing is concerned with that, like how do you come to the city and how much of you changes and how much of you remains and what do you become. So those are some of the things that I want to write about. And I think part of, you know, the one thing I can tell you about the novel is that it has a bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, as an artist that practices a lot of different art forms, how do you make the decision to put the story that you're thinking about into writing versus film versus photography?
I mean, I don't know how I make that decision. I mean, part of it is really just convenience, right? I have no idea how I would visually make anything out of mental illness. Like, I do not see myself taking my camera and invading people's spaces like that and making that full. But it felt more comfortable for me to think about my own community where I come from in the villages and write that. So a lot of, I mean, you know, it comes to that. And sometimes it's, I mean, I was in Tanzania before I came here, and there's a big fishing community in Tanzania. And I made some really interesting images there. But I didn't write anything about it, right? So it really depends on what works at that time and so what time is available to me, because at the time I was in Tanzania, I was writing a story, so I didn't have the time to write another, but I could make the images. So it really works in that way.
This isn't exactly a question. I was just going to say that here in America, in Black families, mental illnesses are generally ignored because they're like seen as like being in your feelings, or like you need to work harder or something. So I don't know. I believe this may help shape, like this may, like you said, like help it be more talked about. Like, yeah. And you know, like, yes.
I mean, I completely get you. So even in South Africa, there's a bit of that, right? I mean, especially with depression, if parents will just tell you, just go play outside or listen to some music or watch movies, as if that helps. So definitely, there's a lot more, and this is why I think the story has been interesting for me, because a lot of the conversations about it have been from the point of the villages and the traditional living there. But the truth of it is that even in the city, there's a huge problem.
Okay, so you mentioned that you hadn't written much fiction before the short story. And so I was going to ask, what's the most important thing you've learned in terms of fiction versus nonfiction?
I mean, I'm thinking about it because even in my fiction, I make up stuff. In my nonfiction, I make things up. So, I mean, I think that the major difference is really in facts, right? I mean, there's a certain level with nonfiction that you really cannot write that far away from the truth, right? But with fiction, you can completely do that. So, I mean, for me, it's all the same, right? Because, my poetry exists both in fiction and nonfiction. The real difference is really in the facts.
A couple of questions. How would you characterize the relationship between, or the attitude of the younger generation of South African writers to those, that you can maybe call the older generation who were writing during the moment of apartheid? And I think your work on mental illness, makes me think about the work of Bessie Head, for example, who was engaged more consistently than perhaps most other South African writers, this particular issue there. So I really commend you for, as a young writer, really focusing on that particular issue there. The second question I have is in relation to how, when you write, okay, how do you position yourself vis-a-vis your own indigenous traditions of narrative? Do you consciously try to draw from, let's say, the oral traditions to infuse your writing with certain African or South African specificities as far as style and technique and so on and so forth is concerned?
So, I mean, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, that my own encounter with literature really started very late in my life, and I was already by then aware of sort of like the presence of, I suppose, white writers, and I wanted to read more black writers. So Bessie Head I've read a lot, Chinua Achebe, of course, and a lot of the drum writers in South Africa who were writing at that time. So I've read a lot of that, and I really appreciate it. And I think it's, for me, this in South Africa especially, there seems to have been a space in between the drum writers and the writers now of the absence of the black writer, that they've been designated to sort of write certain type of narratives. So I'm really excited to be writing now in a space where it feels like black writers are really just concerned about writing their own story and not explaining it to anyone. So it's exciting for me to write at this time. Not really to the second question. One of my favorite writers is John Aubrey. And so my obsession with writing has always been poetry and not so much the oral tradition. But it's interesting now that I think about it, because every time I go to readings, there's a sense of that oral tradition as well that exists in that space. So that's what I've been trying to do. I'm not a great reader at all, but thinking about the way that we told stories in the villages helps a lot when it comes to the reading for me.
Hello. I read your story yesterday night. I was fascinated. I don't know whether it's intentional, but I think we all know that mental illness is a harsh issue all over Africa. You don't talk about it. And that this village got engaged in it. I was impressed. I think you've opened the door to villages to get involved in it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, what book are you currently reading? That's it.
I'm currently reading a book that I picked up in Durban called, I can't remember the author, but it's called 50 Ways to Read a Poem. And it was a column that ran on the Independent in England, I think. And so this person would take a poem every week, and they would write about that poem and what that poem is saying, how it's saying it, the difference between the narrative and the rhyme of the poem. And I specifically am reading that because I wanted to get ready for the novel.
Oh, is this an online source, The Independent, that you're speaking of now?
Well, it was published in The Independent, which is a paper in the UK, for someone who knows The Independent, I think. Yes, yes it is.
Ruth Liddell.
Yeah. Was it The Independent? Yeah, okay. It's really an amazing book.
Okay, I'm just wondering if you could tell us or make suggestions on sources that we could read. You mentioned UK, South Africa. Sometimes it is easy to get online sources more quickly than print. Although we have a terrific collection of material here at the Library of Congress about South Africa as well as from South Africa.
Yeah.
Literature, history, you name it, we have it. Cookery, we have these publications. But make some suggestions, please, so that we can remain.
I'm going to ask people to help out. From the top of my head, there's an online platform called Africa in Dialogue from Botswana, which is run by a poet called Hamangwe. She interviews people, and it's like really exciting conversations. There is Chumurenga in Cape Town, which is run by Antonia Jabe. There is, in Nigeria, there is a couple of them. There's Inkara Review in Kenya, there's Gwani in Kenya, there's Warscapes, there's Kings and Kingdoms, and what else is there? There's jalada in Kenya, brittle paper. Yeah, Short Story Day Africa, short, sharp stories as well. So there's a couple of, there's I think it's called Afridia, which is based in the UK for African diasporic writing. So there's also that.
Well, thank you very much, and we're so pleased that you could come here and enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.